Welcome to From the Pilot Seat. Join me as we explore real aviation stories, lessons learned, and incredible flying machines. If you love flying or want to learn, hit subscribe and come along for the ride. For deeper insights, check out my books, Lessons from the Sky and From the Pilot Seat. They could make all the difference on your next flight. Where's the green ring? Lieutenant Zachary Matthews, A-18E Super Hornet, Strike Fighter Squadron 37, December 2011. As much as I've enjoyed reading approach stories over the last few years, my goal was to never write for this publication. My hope in drafting this article is that other aviators might learn a lesson from me and handle their time in the crucible differently. This tale began in late March with a good deal of cross-country with the XO and OPSO. Our Hornet Light Division took off from Gainesville and headed north. We spent the first half of the flight to Indianapolis dodging weather. As we crossed over Atlanta, we approached another cloud bank and I began to move closer to my lead. I look inside my cockpit and briefly saw the two LR bleed warning lights illuminate. I heard Betty say, "Bleed air left. Bleed air left." As quickly as they appeared, the red warning lights went out and the cockpit became much quieter. Then I saw three cautions on my left DDI, L bleed off, R bleed off, and OBOG's DEGD, OBOG's onboard oxygen generation systems. I've only had several emergency procedure EP simulations. In my limited experience handling EPS in the simulator, the warnings came on and stayed on. I knew when a bleed air leak occurred, the bleed air leak detection BALD system should shut it down. However, I didn't know the warning lights would go out so suddenly once the leak was isolated. My onboard oxygen generation system still appeared to be working despite the glaring caution that indicated otherwise. I then reported to my lead, "I've got a problem here." I told him that I had momentary bleed air warning lights, but they had gone out. He then asked if I had inadvertently hit the fire test switch. Well, maybe I did, I thought. Everything seemed normal except for the cautions remaining on my DDI. It was entirely possible that I had accidentally hit the fire test switch, which would trigger the red warning lights and the oral tones, as well as shut off the bleed air system. However, after the incident, I remembered that all the lights illuminate with the fire test switch and that Betty always starts with engine fire left. As I pondered the situation like a deer staring in the headlights of a semi on a 95, I exhaled and suddenly couldn't breathe. When the OBOGS shut down with the rest of the ECS, residual air remained in the system. This air had just run out, and I had a perfectly sealed rubber mask on my face which prevented me from inhaling. The cabin pressure dumped as well, sending the contents of my sinuses down the back of my throat. My instinctual and incorrect response was to pop off my mask. While this was happening, I told the lead exactly what I saw. He quickly and correctly surmised that I was dealing with an actual emergency. He instructed me to pull the green ring. I thought, okay, the green ring, left side. Where's the green ring? I could not find the green ring. I've strapped into a Hornet more than 100 times, a lot I know, and looked at that green ring every time. My problem was that I'd never actually put my hand on it in flight. I'm 6 feet 4 inches tall, and my flight gear restricts my vision down into the cockpit. I couldn't see the green ring, so I couldn't pull it. The effects of hypoxia were immediate and overwhelming. I was acutely aware that my mental faculties were quickly fading. I couldn't find the green ring where I expected it to be, and in my state of confusion, I somehow regressed back to my FRS days where some of the older jets have the green ring on the inside of the ejection seat. I was literally lifting up the seat cushion looking for it. I was panicking. I could feel my mind slipping away from me, all while trying to fly form in the clouds. I had enough useful consciousness to know that if I didn't find the ring within the next 5 seconds, I would need to do something else. The definition of stupidity or hypoxia is to do the same thing over and over while expecting a different result. I was a prime example. I couldn't find the ring, so it was time to descend. I didn't discuss this decision with anyone. I made a unilateral decision as my lead and XO were trying to talk my eyes onto the green ring. I heard, "Left thigh, left thigh." I then looked out to my left and saw the most beautiful, glorious thing I've ever seen. A big fat hole in the clouds to the west, complete with sunshine and blue skies. It was wonderful. "I'm going there," I thought. "I'm descending," I said. I pushed the stick forward. My lead and the XO quickly became smaller. As I began my descent, a radio call from lead cut through the hypoxia and rattled me into doing something useful. I heard, "Left thigh by the harness lock." I have used the harness lock before in flight. I knew where that was. I put my hand on it and went back an inch, and there it was. The green ring. I pulled it and felt the wonderful flow of oxygen. I put on my mask, and the hypoxia symptoms immediately cleared. So I had that going for me, which was nice. "Is your mask on?" asked Dash 3. "Yes, XO," I replied. Everything was going to be okay, but the flight wasn't over yet. I was in marginal VMC on top with the XO, now on my wing, but my lead had continued on course. Remember, we were over Atlanta, one of the busiest aviation corridors in the country, and I had just rapidly descended 10,000 feet directly over the city. Apparently, our Atlanta Center controller was a fan of the Navy and also happened to be Johnny on the spot with a suitable divert, Dobbins ARB. He immediately helped the emergency section, the XO and me, with a separate squawk and vectors to Dobbins. The XO and I read through the rest of the EP out of the PCL as we set up for our PAR. The rest of the approach went well, and I touched down to a nice reception of fire trucks and ambulances. Say what you want about the Air Force, but the folks at Dobbins were wonderful hosts. Everyone from tower to the linemen were professional, and they did everything they could to help us out. My squadron sent a maintenance detachment on Monday to fix the jet so I could fly it back to Oceana. I found out that a $7.38 rubber boot connecting the ECS turbine to the bleed air ducts exploded in the keel. The AME one in charge of the maintenance detachment said he'd never seen one do that in more than 10 years of working on Hornets. Lessons learned. What can you learn from my mistakes? The first step in the dual bleed air warning procedure is not to talk. The PCL states that you shall execute the boldface for warning lights of any duration. Also, because the bald system should immediately shut down the bleed air system when it determines a leak, you may not see a warning light. The indications of a dual bleed air warning may only be Betty or just the associated bleed-off cautions and OBOGs DEGD. This emergency really becomes three separate emergencies: dual bleed-off cautions, loss of cabin pressurization, and low mask flow, no mask flow hypoxia. The good news is that a common step that solves 95% of your problems: emergency oxygen green ring. Pull. Imagine if I had immediately pulled the green ring as NATOPS instructs. Lead, I had dual bleed air warning lights. I've pulled the green ring, recommend descent to 10,000 feet. Done. Easy. Problem solved. Just land the airplane. Instead, I became hypoxic, almost losing a jet in my life. Few emergency procedures in the Hornet need to be done right now. Pulling the green ring is one of them. We all know that we're supposed to aviate, navigate, communicate, but you can't aviate if your brain is starved of oxygen. I communicated first. Big mistake. You may see the green ring every time you get in the jet, but I strongly suggest that the next time you strap in, put your hand on it so you know where it is. Pull it if you want to. The great thing about the green ring is that you can reset it. It's not a one-way street. The Navy has plenty of gaseous oxygen to replace whatever you suck out of the seat pan. It really isn't a big deal to pull it if you don't need it. However, it is a big deal if you don't pull it when you should. That little ring is as important as the ejection handle. It's just as likely to save your life. If you love flying or want to learn, hit subscribe and come along for the ride. For deeper insights, check out my books, Lessons from the Sky and From the Pilot's Seat. They could make all the difference on your next flight.